This is entitled Titus 3 and Heretic in the Patristics. And we will be examining the Church Fathers. We will be going in depth on the Fathers when they reference Titus chapter 3. And particularly the term heretic. This is the only place in the New Testament where we can find heretic used in the biblical Greek in the New Testament. And indeed we'll be examining when the Fathers touch upon Titus 3. What do they have to say? And particularly I find this important because, as many of you here may realize, sedevacantes, they make a living off of labeling popes heretics. You know, they say this must be what the Pope is thinking. You know, he's a heretic. Let's toss out material and formal heresy. Let's toss those terms out today. Those terms are of no interest to us. We want to deal with heresy in its totality, in the fact that it doesn't make any sense if they want to label any of the popes heretics or not. The way the Fathers viewed heresy, a heretic, and the way Scripture views it, it isn't in line with the sedevacantes. And I've been asking for a while. I hope one day a sedevacantes can come forth that can read the biblical languages, and they can sit down or can give me a call and talk to me, or sit down with me, and they can explain to me how the Catholic position is wrong on this. And we're going to examine John Chrysostom. Contentions, he means, with heretics, in which he would not have us labor to no purpose, where nothing is to be gained. For they end in nothing. For when a man is perverted and predetermined not to change his mind, whatever may happen, why should you labor in vain? Moving on, he says, but when he is known and manifest to all, why do you contend in vain? Why do you beat the air? What means being condemned of himself? Because he cannot say that no one has told him, no one has admonished him. Since therefore after admonition he continues the same, he is self-condemned. In Chrysostom, a man that is insistent on not changing their mind is in a state of heresy. Chrysostom later in this relevant location quotes a relevant portion from Titus 3, in which the only usage of the term heretic is employed. We are shown just why a man is in heresy. Chrysostom upholds the Catholic truth that a man that rejects the truth knowingly is self-condemned. He is one of the first Fathers that would employ the term manifest when dealing with the topic of heresy. Chrysostom shows that a manifest heretic is one that has chosen to condemn himself because he cannot say that no one has told him or admonished him. That was clear in Chrysostom. In the second ship that is sedevacantism, we have individuals that believe that they, mere laymen most of the time, have the ability to be able to identify when a pope is a heretic. The problem is that they bypass the biblical and historical Catholic mandate on being able to identify a true heretic. Moving on to Ambrose. Ambrose says, one who is a heretic avoid after the first reproof, knowing that such a one is fallen and is in sin, being condemned of his own judgment. In Ambrose's masterful work on the Christian faith, we find a brief look at Titus 3. Ambrose doesn't seem to go into great depth, but shows us the truth that a person that has condemned himself of his own judgment after having been admonished should be avoided. But Ambrose nevertheless is quite clear that heresy is easy to detect because it would be thick-laid, and all that surrounds would be so obvious in its error that he even describes it similar to black dogs that howl. If we examine sedevacantism, we can see that 99% of the Catholic faithful simply don't agree with outrageous conclusions that these individuals make. Not only have the majority abandoned what the biblical text tells us about heresy, but they abandon what the Patristics tell us as well. Ambrose says that heresy is similar to black dogs that howl. Our images of John Paul II kissing the Quran tantamount to saying that he then supports Islam. I suppose in the same vein we can say that Paul supports paganism because he tells the pagans that we're offspring of God, and he praises him. He calls them very religious, the Greek term daimon there. Moving on to Athanasius. He says, one who is heretical after a first and second admonition refuse, knowing that such a one is perverted in sins, being self-condemned. Athanasius was a great witness to heresy hunting. the staunch combatant against the heresy of Arianism, he employed Titus 3 in order to be able to better identify that a person is surely heretical. Athanasius, of all people, knew that after a person is admonished and continues in their perversions, is self-condemned. This was the fact with Arius and the Arioheads, as some aptly dubbed them. Athanasius would have shuddered at the heresy of sedevacantism that has risen and taken so many innocent and ignorant individuals with him. In sedevacantism, we have a private interpretation of church documents, an ignorant misreading of the scriptures, and a complete lack of coherence. Basil the Great, he says, but if he does not even in this case correct himself, he must be cut off from the rest as a cause of scandal, and be looked upon as a heathen and a publican. Basil shows us that a person is cut off from the flock because they are looked upon as heretical after numerous admonitions. In his vision of Titus and the term heretic, we see a clear example of how the early church viewed and stamped out heresy to the best of their abilities. Whereas not touching upon the topic of the Bishop of Rome falling into heresy, he shows that one is an obstinate person who is an obstinate person should be reported to the superior for their punishment. It is a higher authority that will have to rebuke a person for Basil. Listen, it is a higher authority, not a mere layperson, that will have to rebuke a person for Basil. And afterwards, even if they continue on their ways, they are cut off from the church. Tertullian says, it is the same Paul who in his epistle to the Galatians counts heresies among the sins of the flesh. He that is perverted and commits sin as a self-condemned man. Careful. Listen carefully. Tertullian says, in reference to the Greek word heresies, a word used in the sense of that choice, which a man makes when he either teaches them to others or takes up with them for himself. I dare ask, what heresies has any pope taught to the Catholic faithful? What heresies do they believe in, other than the misrepresentations that the sedevacantists foist upon them? Tertullian says, for this reason it is that he calls a heretic self-condemned, because he has himself chosen that in which he is condemned. Tertullian tells us about Paul in his letter to the Galatians, where he speaks of carnal pleasures and heresies. But it is only in Titus where we find the term heretic employed, and the way in which we must reject a person and deem him outside the flock. After numerous admonitions, a man is self-condemned. Cyprian. If anyone of the gathered goes outside, that is, if anyone who once obtained grace in the church nevertheless abandons the church, his blood will be upon his head. He will have himself to blame for his damnation. The Apostle Paul explains this, directing us to avoid a heretic as perverted, sinful, and self-condemned. In this letter of Cyprian's, he talks about Paul's directives on avoiding a heretic. A heretic is one that was part of the church and has abandoned the flock. Maximus of Turin. For the heretic damns himself when he casts himself out of the Catholic Church, and under no compulsion leaves the gathering of the saints. This particular passage from Maximus is very important, in that it shows us a heretic need not be disposed by the sentence of a higher authority in all instances. Some individuals depart by their own will before actually being removed by a higher authority. In Maximus, we see that one has abandoned the gathering of the saints because of their own judgment. God bless you.